But that elicitation is so powerful because we're not being asked questions. So our brain doesn't set off little security alarms. And this is how Soviet spies would get information from a 19-year-old U.S. Navy sailor in the early days of the Cold War.
You talk about this elicitation.
Yeah.
What is elicitation? It's a CIA technique, right?
It is. It was originally came up with by this guy named John Nolan, and his book is no longer for sale. You have to get it on eBay. Like, it's hard to find. But the book is called Confidential.
Why isn't it no longer for sale?
I think that he just kind of pulled it off the shelf. I'm not sure.
Okay.
So elicitation is about using statements instead of questions. And I'll give you an example. Let's say you and I walk into Whole Foods, which is, we're in New York, so it's probably a block away somewhere. Mm-hmm. And we walk in there and there's, let's say there's a young lady stocking produce, and you get in there and I say, all right, Stephen, your goal is to go figure out how much she makes in 60 seconds. And you're not allowed to ask any questions or be awkward. And that's tough, right? It sounds really tough. So if you went over to her, and this is a generalization just to get you to understand what elicitation is, and said, hey, I'm trying to find the baby carrots. And she walks you over there. But while you're walking, you say, I just read this article online that says all Whole Foods employees just got bumped up to $26 an hour. That's fantastic. And she turns around and goes, what? No, I make 17. So now she doesn't feel like she's been pressed or questioned about how much she makes. She's correcting you. Mm-hmm. Or if you, let's say you got into an Uber tonight and you said, I just read this article that Uber drivers were one of the top most highly satisfied employees in the country. You're going to get a correction. And you're going to be like, what? Where did you read that? So triggering a need to correct the record is one of the easiest ways to use elicitation, but it's only one. Another one is just making a statement afterwards and saying, I bet you had some interesting experiences doing that, or I can imagine that was challenging. Statements are always going to be better than asking pointed questions because a person feels like they're volunteering information. The third layer of that is disbelief. Let's say I wanted to ask if you just got back from vacation and I didn't want to use any questions. Let's say we meet up for dinner or something, and I said, Stephen, you look like you just got back from a vacation. That's a statement. And you're like, no, actually, I've been doing this, 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 and this. So now you've given me more than if I just asked if you were on vacation. Mm-hmm. And I said, wow, that had to be interesting. I can't imagine that. There's got to be a lot of stuff going on there. And you start talking more and more and more. And then, like, that sounds great. There was no challenges to that entire trip. I love when everything is 100% flawless. And you're like, no, well, actually, and then you start going into that. And I'm like, no way. And then now we have disbelief that comes in. And I haven't asked a single question yet. So that's one thing that I challenge everybody that I train to get really good at is that elicitation piece. So how many layers can I get into a person or a conversation just using these statements? And that's why I wrote, there's a whole chapter about it in this book here. But that elicitation is so powerful because we're not being asked questions. So our brain doesn't set off little security alarms. And this is how Soviet spies would get information from a 19-year-old U.S. Navy sailor in the early days of the Cold War. Ship would pull into Thailand, or a submarine would pull into Thailand or Singapore, and a Russian would go up and these sailors would be drinking at the bar. Russian would sit there, he's got a Aloha shirt on or something, and strike up a conversation. And they say, I know that the German submarines could outrun you because their propellers are 22 and all of your submarine propellers are 18 feet in diameter. And the sailor, slightly drunk, turns around and says, no, they're not. And starts giving up all this information just to correct the record. And that's all they did back then, was just correcting the record. I'm triggering this need to offer some kind of correction to information that's inaccurate. And even with business intelligence, let's say that a company's moving and they have to get business intelligence. Somebody at that company will get approached at a bar and somebody will say, yeah, I heard you guys are moving between March and April. And they'll get corrected. And they'll say, no, it's actually February, but we're not really supposed to talk about it. It's like, there's no way you're going to move in February. It's too cold. And the interest rates are up too high. There's no possible way that the CEO would ever do that. It's like, yeah. And then you're going to get more information out because of the disbelief. So that was correcting the record, A second technique called bracketing, where I'm giving you a series like between March and May, or between 39 and 59. And the third is the disbelief that starts getting this information out of people. So if you want to think about like, how do I start a conversation or continue one using elicitation, think of the words so, and then do a recap. So you've been doing this for 3 years, or so this is not the best job, but it's getting things done for you. Or I bet. So I bet that was interesting. I bet there were still some challenges there. Or I bet you overcame a whole lot to get to this point. So, or I bet is the best way to do that.
And so if I say, I bet you hate that coffee.
Yeah.
That's a statement, but you're going to endeavor to correct the record either way.
Yeah.
And if you do hate the coffee, you'll say, yeah, like even you saying, yes, I do kind of hate it is offering up information.
Yeah.
Okay. Interesting.
And you could even go on with that. I mean, like, I bet you hate that coffee. And somebody says, yeah, well, I do kind of hate it. Like, I can imagine you're the kind of person who likes coffee a very specific way. Well, yeah, here's how I like it a lot. And say, that's extremely interesting. No creamer, no sugar. And I'm just recapping.
So why is that better than me just going, how do you prefer your coffee?
Well, if we're just talking about coffee, it's not sensitive information. So I wouldn't say that was better.
It's for sensitive information.
Yeah.
When you're trying to not get their guard up.
Yeah. So the rule of thumb is the more sensitive the information is that you need, the less questions you need to be asking.